First of all, I'm going to talk about the working groups for OpenSFS. So I've been involved for over 10 years as the lead of with Rick. Rick, we can put your hand up, yeah, of the Lustre working group. And so we oversee collaboration between organizations around anything to do with Lustre development and the community releases of Lustre. We also do things like organize the Developer Day, which I'll talk about a bit more later, and the survey, talk about it very soon. And then there's more recently the documentation working group. So Ellis over there, Ellis, do you want to wave your hand? Yeah, from Microsoft is the lead of that. And that's something that as well, so many of you could, if you're not already, get involved in helping to sort of update all the wealth of information out there about Lustre and make sure it's sort of, get rid of all the stale information so that people can find it easier to engage when they're trying to find their way with Lustre. So the community survey, we've been doing this for a really long time now, actually, and you can see that link there. There's all of the previous 15 odd years of surveys, the more detailed reports. I'm going to give you a brief summary of the highlights here. I will post after, when I sit down again on the Wi-Fi, I will post the more detailed report about this year's data. But I'll dash straight in with a summary. So this was a new question. So many of the questions we ask in the survey, we try and make it pretty succinct so it doesn't take very long to answer. And we kind of keep quite a bit of consistency year to year so we can spot trends as things are changing. In addition, this year that we added in, which I think is was very useful because it was how long has your organization been using Lustre? Now, if you look at these results, like there was an option for less than a year. Nobody who responded selected that. So of the 47 organizations, all of them were pretty experienced, and you can see the 72% were using Lustre for more than 10 years. So you have to sort of look at, we know that's not reflective of the broader Lustre community. The Lustre community has expanded quite considerably, particularly over the last 5 years or so, with, more usage of Lustre with AI workloads. But those, we're seeing consistency year on year. That, like I always say, that although I know that the survey is somewhat flawed, at least it's consistently flawed, so you can still do year-to-year comparisons. But it does mean you have to look at the data we're getting through the lens of it's, broadly this information is, or these opinions are coming from more, very experienced Lustre sites who obviously, know what they're doing and have determined long-term that Lustre works for them. So, and then this is another side of it. This is a long-standing question. These results are fairly consistent every year. We see about at least half the, so the green on the pie chart is people who don't have any formal support. They're just using the community versions of Lustre for free and just, turning to the mailing lists or their own in-house expertise to get through issues. The blue is people who are maybe working with a vendor, whomever that is. There's a lot more choices nowadays. And then the red is, organizations who are actually, offering that support to others. So this is what the question is which of these categories do you can select multiple for this? Which categories would you say are the primary, describe something the vertical that you operate in with your usage of Lustre. The bottom line there is AI machine learning, and that is, across all the other verticals, people are, doing, meteorology and AI machine learning as well. So there's lots of double dipping, as it were, from the respondents. But you can see, broadly, there's a whole range of usage, anything with very intensive data usage, people can be using Lustre. So Lustre versions, this is the question I'm most interested in seeing how things change over time. If you look at the colors, so the green bar on the right is this year's data, and these are adjusted by percentages, so it's easier to do year-on-year comparisons, even if the numbers of respondents fluctuate slightly. You can, it's adjusted to percentages of overall, so you can get the year-on-year comparison. So you can see the same colors, it's going back 2 years, so you can see how it's shifted, and then you can see from the colors, you can see this year's, you can see very much that 215 is, much above all the others. And then the other things you can see, last year's data was in red, so still 215 was, the highest then, but it was relatively, it's gone up even more so as a proportion since then. And then the interesting thing is you see, obviously, as you go back years, some of the newer releases didn't exist at the time the survey was run. So you can see last year, about 20% of the respondents selected a 216 option. And then this year, that those numbers seem to have been split between 216 and 217. So as this survey goes out early on in the year, it's, maybe there's not much time. The 217 release came out late in 2025, so maybe by now some of those others using 216 have also upgraded. But broadly, it's sort of, you can see that there's a lot of people who coalesce around the LTS and like that stability and predictability. And then there's people I think largely for reasons of wanting to use newer kernels, they are more likely to jump forward with the newer versions as they come out. Okay, and so that ties us into the LTS transition. So 215, I think we're coming up to about 4 years. I have a slide a bit later on where we can look at all the releases and when they've come out. We asked a question this year about when people thought we should switch. Now, a similar question last year, overwhelmingly, people gave the feedback they weren't ready to switch. There was a minority, but it was very much, 70+% of people didn't want to move. Now, this year, we framed the question in as well, we're gonna move. Which one do you want? There was a write-in option. Honestly, I kind of anticipated we might have people write in and say, no, we should stay on 215 longer, but nobody did. But there was although it was slightly more of the respondents tilted towards a 218, which would be a slightly longer of the options, there was still, almost half of the people wanted to move sooner with a 217. So the main differences there is 217 would have RHEL 9 servers, and 218 would have RHEL 10 servers. So if we do go with a 218 option, that would mean that we never have an LTS option with a RHEL 9. We just jump straight from a RHEL 8 as 215 today straight to a RHEL 10, which presumably would have a fairly long runway on it. So anyway, we've had some initial, very preliminary discussions at the LWG about this. Our intention is to finalize the decision ahead of ISC in June. For the Lustre buff there, we make sure we have the roadmap there with that information to communicate to people. It is a bit of a dynamic that I know there's some other projects who do run an LTS where they say for Ubuntu, for example, where they have a very predictable timeline. We have a new LTS every 2 years. However, they still do have some uncertainty because the kernel version is uncertain and it can be a bit, the same dynamic. Is it you lean forward and you get the newer features and maybe at the expense of a little bit of stability concerns or less proven versus taking a more conservative approach. So we have tried different things over the decades where we've had something similar. We try and, provide updates. We have limited resources. We can't be making releases that no one uses. What do we focus our efforts on? So I'd be happy to hear your opinions while we're here. So please, this is a topic I'm very interested to chat about. And then, like I say, we'll be talking about it more at the LWG. You're more than welcome to come and join in those discussions, or, we'll update you as we finalize the decision in the weeks ahead. Okay, Linux distributions. So as you can see here, like the majority of things are, of options are RHEL 8. So this is, you know, if whether you're using 212 or 215, which are the two most common options, that would be a RHEL 8 servers. Oh no, sorry, RHEL 12 is still on RHEL 7, so you still see there's a, even though that there's sort of more limited support for CentOS 7 or RHEL 7 nowadays, there is still, you know, a good 20% of people have at least one file system in production that's using that. And then interestingly, there were a couple of people who are using Ubuntu servers in production, and that's not something that we put effort into the you know, validation of things or keeping up to date. But there's people who have enough of an interest to keep the patch series up to date, and obviously it works well enough that people are using, you know, those certainly will fall in the category of people who are self-supporting. So I think it's great that that works to give people that flexibility, you know, that could be something that I think as a community would be attractive for us to get sort of broader adoption if we are able to sort of expand. You know, Ubuntu, I think, is a very common choice in the sort of AI sort of more classic, you know, AI, not more from a classic HPC entering into AI, but people who are coming in to use Lustre from a more of an AI background. I think there's a stronger interest in Ubuntu in those sort of groups from my direct experience. So on the client side, we do have a lot more diversity. The most significant shift this year was the RHEL 9 has taken over as the most common client option. It was RHEL 8 last year. And then, but yes, there's still, you know, all different versions of, you know, Debian or SUSE or Ubuntu that others are using. ZFS, or LDiskFS, like this is definitely, you see about roughly year on year, it's about 2/3 of people are using LDiskFS, and then about 1/3 are using ZFS. So, you know, clearly strong interest in, you know, in both options. And then this was a new question we asked this year. Just curious, you know, there's a number of things that we know we could do. You know, I think the death of HDD has been a long-standing thing, and you know, there's a lot of focus on, you know, all flash systems, and but then realizing that there's still a very large, you know, segment of the community who are using HDD. We wanted just to see, because there's further things we could do that would improve the performance for HDD, and I think because of the pricing and the maybe supply issues as well, this is, you know, a lot of people, the question is, are you, you know, considering that you may get, you know, HDD and you can see like the overwhelming majority of respondents in this survey at least, you know, felt it was a possibility that they would have to give serious consideration to. So that does seem like, you know, and that's the thing, is some of the sort of, you know, made for AI technologies have only considered, you know, flash, supporting flash. Well, of course, we support flash too, but there's just more flexibility to have maybe even more of a hybrid system when you're using Lustre. So yeah, so analysis overall, I've talked about some of this as we've gone through. Yeah, so probably the only thing I haven't touched on this slide is there was a question, you know, we used to always ask, you know, what new features would you like? And hardly anyone ever used to answer that question. So we restructured the question to now ask, you know, when you use something else, what is it that drives you to do it? Because that gets the same that seems to draw out the actual answer a bit better. And then there were, you know, maybe 5, 6 people who gave the feedback that they wanted to have something use some other technologies because of, you know, better S3 integration. And then there were a similar sort of number who were looking for snapshots. So it'll be interesting to know if you're amongst those. I'd be interested to understand a bit more about the use cases that you're using snapshots for, because there could be different ways to solve those. So that would be interesting for us to understand. So okay, so on to the more specifics about the releases. So 2.15, as you can see, if you look at the dates in this table, you can see in the initial sort of year, it was a bit more regular, but otherwise it's been 2 releases a year for a number of years for 2.15. And so following this cadence, we'd expect there to be a 2.15.9 coming out with RHEL 9.8 client support, sort of probably about June-ish sort of time frame. This picture, of course, needs no introduction, but just in case you're not amongst any of their 189 Instagram followers, this is the Tokyo-based alt-pop group 217, just to be clear, nothing to do with the Lustre 217 release. So the 217 release came out towards late last year, has sported newer distros and everything, some new sort of innovations around hybrid I/O and node maps. But yeah, they just I think most of the people who are using it are using it because of the newer distro support rather than those new features per se. Contribution lists. So these 2 graphs. Didn't do a good job with my scaling there, but yeah. So the left-hand graph is commits. So each number there is a patch commit, whatever size that's included in the sort of roughly 1 year long development cycle. And then the reviews is, as we go through each patch, our process is that you have to have at least 2, peers review the code and look for any sort of possible, shortcomings to make sure and iterate till we get that to be in a good state, as well as passing testing. So there can be, many more reviews than patches. It's a minimum of 2, could be, 14, 15 iterations of multiple people to get to the final state that gets you a tally on the left-hand graph. So you can see, we have a fairly, a number of people active. I normally like to spotlight new contributions. So we have University of Nebraska is one. GlueSys, which is, I believe, a South Korean integrator, was another. Of course, TLC just came in right at the end of this release, so we just got off the mark there. And then, all the usual suspects, DDN, AWS, Aeon, HPE, Oak Ridge, all reliably year on year are making major contributions to the releases. And this is looking at that sort of data over a longer period, since we've had the more of a broader community of developers. And you can see how the 217 release fits in. The blue line at the top is the number of developers. So you can see we have that fluctuates over time. And then red is the number of organizations. Again, even though the actual organizations sometimes shift, new people come in, maybe people, things, deprioritize for people, we've seen a fairly constant sort of numbers. And I think, early signs are on 218 that there's even, slightly increasing diversity. So 218, so this is the major release that we're working on at the moment. So we have, it's roughly, we aim to have one of these major releases out every year. And we have sort of guardrails around timings for landings and things, so we have time to, stabilize and make sure by the time the releases come out that we can feel comfortable about them. So some of the, you see the upper right quadrant, you can see there's the different distros. Some of these distros don't exist yet. These are just we anticipate from published timelines. So we expect, they're meant, due to be released in time for us to be able to support them comfortably for the planned 218 timeline. And then there's, unfortunately, it is cut off a bit. There is a longer table there, believe me. There's quite a lot of different features that are in active development from different organizations that could be candidates for the 218 release. So our rules are that you have to have, pushed into the centralized review tool by the end of May to be eligible for inclusion. So you can't have somebody come up with some big complicated feature 2 days before the deadline, throw it in. So, but we've come, recognize it can take a while. You want to make sure that you've got time to do all the testing, do all the reviews. So once you're eligible for inclusion, you've got till the end of August to actually complete that and get that all done in time. So this is sort of arranged in this decoupled way so that we have a clear idea of what's coming and time to schedule enough airtime for testing and things to make sure things are all working well by the time the release comes around, and we don't end up, hopefully with this approach, we don't end up with partial features in a release that sort of aren't usable or even worse, sort of disruptive. So we did update recently the roadmap. So this shows the plans around upcoming 215 releases, and for the 218 timeline, again, it's cut off at the bottom, but you get, I think the key things are there. So we would expect, like in the late end of the year for the projecting forward, we would have the major releases, and we will be able to do a refresh of this again ahead of the Lustre ISC. That by then we'll be past the feature cutoff, so we'll be able to be more precise about content for 218, and we'll also be able to provide clarity about the next LTS release to set expectations. So when we do a transition, we do have a 6-month overlap, so there will still be 215 releases in that time for new, distro support or whatever, or perhaps increasingly unlikely, but if there was to be an important bug that was, discovered as well, we would still expect to issue a 215 release to cover that. And then it's obviously different whether it's we select going with a 217 or a 218 maybe alters people's attitude towards the 218 release itself in terms of content and the amount of testing needed, etc. So Developer Day. So this is an excellent thing. In fact, Aurelian here from NVIDIA, when he was back at CA, first introduced this concept at the LUG conference, the equivalent conference in Europe, and we've since then adopted the same thing at LUG. So we have either a day before or after. We have this year it's after. We usually have representatives from development organizations who will get together and discuss features or overlap areas to work through and or work on some code improvements, process changes and things. So it just having this opportunity of people being together just lends itself towards sort of accelerating those things that would take a really long time to do on an email thread that maybe keeps going quiet, etc. So this year, we try and have a policy of these to be inclusive, as we're, one of the remits is to try and expand the development community. But we've had amazing interest this year. So I think we've had this year about double the number of participants compared to last year's conference at Stanford. So I think the numbers were fairly similar in terms of the attendees at the main conference, but I guess there's a higher proportion of people with an interest in the development side of things attending this year. So yeah, we have 45 attendees will be participating on Thursday. So that's, you know, a lot. And we do have, again, these slides will be posted online, I think. Maybe it's easier to see the links there, but it is truncated slightly, that it is, you know, any presentations and things are posted as well, so people who are not able to attend in person can still keep abreast of what we're up to. So that's, I think that's just about it. So just to summarize, we have 2 releases due out probably this year, community releases 259 and 218. And then just to sort of another plug again for the Lustre working group and the documentation working group. There's no requirement, you know, while I would encourage any of you whose organizations aren't a member of OpenSFS to, you know, seriously consider joining. That's not a requirement to participate. So you can, you know, it's open, you're free to join, and you know, whether you want to just be a passive observer or to be very active in the discussions and getting things done, you know, all engagement levels are welcome. Okay, so that's it. Any questions?
And then the later one, I just wanted some clarity on like 215.9 release. This, wait, no, just go forward.
This one?
No. If you go forward a few slides, the timeline.
Oh, the roadmap?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in here it says Q2, but its next slide says Q4. So which one is it? Yeah.
It is Q2.
So it is Q2.
Yeah. I'll fix that, sorry.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm happy to take questions just on breaks and things if you're more comfortable with that, but yeah, otherwise I think we are on a break, right? Yeah.